If you haven't seen part 1 of the Cut Shot series, I highly recommend going back now and watching it before continuing to this one, which is part 2. And I'll link that right now in the top right hand corner. You can just click that and it'll drop down, and then click on the video and it'll take you there in another window. So this video will still be here when you get done with that, and you can just close that window and come right back to here. We already got started on 30-degree cuts, and this is because this is the most popular angle for advanced pool players, because they can get the cue ball anywhere on the table that they want to get the cue ball from this angle. This is the angle they're always looking for. Now, of course, all that depends on how many balls are in their way, but all this angle will increase your possibilities of getting that cue ball to where you need. So if we look at this graphic, we see it's not the center of the cue ball contacting the aiming point on this object ball, and it's not the edge of the cue ball contacting the aiming spot. It is in between. It is the 1/4 of a ball contacting the aiming spot, and this is what you have to focus on if you want to consistently make this ball. And this is with no English put on the cue ball at all. That's going to complicate things, and we're going to get a little bit into that by the end of this video. For now, it's just best to focus on center cue ball. And once you have the basics of this, you'll pick that up right away. The part that most people are missing on this shot is it's the front of the cue ball that's hitting this object ball. And we are aiming on the back of it. If we're looking straight down the shot, we are aiming the cue tip at the back of the cue ball. But it's the front of the cue ball that's going to be contacting the aiming point on the object ball. So everything about your aiming point and your stroke from the backswing forward can be absolutely perfect. But if there's a flaw at the point of hitting the cue ball or falling through the cue ball, then you're going to miss this shot, and that's because it's unintentionally putting English on the cue ball. So therefore, it's deflecting. So standard pool balls are 2 1/4 inches wide. So you have to think about this when you're aiming a pool shot. If your stroke is not exactly straight, and I mean exactly straight, from start until where your Q-tip ends up, you're going to miss this shot. So you can hit this cue ball all day long, dead center. You can know exactly where to aim it and exactly where the cue ball is going to hit that object ball. But if there's a flaw in your stroke, you're going to miss it, consistently miss it. And this is what almost all amateur pool players do. There's a flaw in their stroke. You can put things on your Q-tip to make sure you're hitting dead center ball. But if your stroke is off, you're going to unintentionally put English on this shot. You're going to deflect it, and you're going to miss it. And what happens with millions and millions and millions of amateur players is they start putting English, intentionally putting English on this shot, not knowing that they're deflecting the ball, and then they start making the ball. They're spinning the cue ball to the object ball, and they're spinning the object ball into, and that's to compensate for their miss. So they're adjusting one thing to compensate for something else that is wrong, and that something else is a flawed stroke. And if it's not intentional English, what they're doing is they're pivoting. They're calling it a pivot, and that pivot is a compensation for a flawed stroke, which is what's wrong with most amateur pool players. What players do, because all their focus is on aiming the ball right to and hitting it where they want to hit it, is they do that. Once they get their aim right, they do that. They go through the motions and they hit it exactly where they want to hit it, and then they watch the ball go into the pocket. You can do all that and add another point to what you're focusing on, and that's where your Q-tip is ending after you stroke the shot. And this is why your tip should end up on the table and frozen. That's what you want to pay attention to, where the tip ends up. Not where, well, you want to pay attention to where it begins, but you also want to pay strict attention to where it ends. So if you aim here and you have it all lined up perfect and everything is great, go ahead and shoot it, but pay attention to where the tip is ending up. If it ends up here, you have a flawed stroke. If it ends up here, you have a flawed stroke. If it ends up anywhere except right here, you have a flawed stroke. To diagnose this, both your aiming and your stroke at the same time, set up this shot right here as a long straight in shot and make sure it's absolutely dead straight in. Aim it nothing but center ball, exact center ball as you see it. Just make sure it's dead center ball. And shoot this shot over and over and over. If you miss it, it's either your aim or your stroke. Most likely, it's your stroke. And to figure it out, you got to pay attention to where that tip ends up as you're shooting, after you shoot it. And you can take this even further and put a little bit of center top on it and try to follow that cue ball right into the pocket to scratch. In the very least, you should pay attention to where the cue ball is after the shot. It should be somewhere on that line. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of reasons for an inconsistent pool game. But let's say you've been around, you've worked on your basics, everything is great, and plus your aim is great and your stroke is straight as an arrow, straight as it can be. If you find yourself going out one day and playing like a world beater, and the next day you can't make 2 balls in a row, it's because most likely you're using English on the cue ball, and the problem with English is it deflects the cue ball. And almost every single time we're using English to get position on the next balls, right? See, the problem with using English is people use it to make balls. So the only time we need it is when we need to gain position on the following balls. And there are a few exceptions to that. But the issue with English and deflection is every single shot is not the same. You have different distances, you have different speeds that you're hitting the cue ball, you have different amounts of English that you're putting on the cue ball. And so unless you're Buddy Hall and really old school and you shoot every single shot the same speed and just use English to gain position, then you're going to have an inconsistent pool game because not every pool shot is the same. This is what deflection is. Take note, this is an extreme example just to illustrate this point, but even if our stroke is straight and our aim is perfect and we're parallel with the aiming point in the center of the line, you put right hand English on this, the cue ball goes left and you miss the shot because you're not contacting that 2 ball exactly where you want it. And to complicate this even further is if you put right hand English on this, now you're spinning the cue ball counterclockwise. And so you're doing this whole thing to gain position on the following ball because you want the cue ball to come off this rail here and stay down table. But the problem is you miss the object ball. And that's because the cue ball is not hitting the 2 ball where you intended to hit it, and that's because of the deflection. It's the same the other way around. You put left hand English on it, the cue ball deflects to the right, and you miss your aiming. So let's go back to the original graphic, and how do we possibly put English on this ball to gain position when we know we're going to miss the aiming point? That's a damn good question, and to complicate that question, how do we consistently put English on the cue ball with different distances, different speeds, and different places we need to be on the next object ball? All great questions, that's what you should be thinking about, but first you need to practice that center ball shot at 30 degrees. Don't worry about position, just worry about now let you know where exactly to aim that cue ball, and then we'll pick it up in the next part of the series and how and where to aim that cue ball, knowing the cue ball is going to deflect a little. Stay with me, we're just getting started. Peace.